the dog who saved my life. The morning sun came through my bedroom window, making everything look golden and warm. It should have been the happiest day of my life. In just 1 week, I was going to marry Daniel, the man I thought was perfect for me. I met Daniel 3 years ago at a work party. I didn't want to go, but my friend made me. Daniel was there, looking handsome and confident. He had the most beautiful smile and was so smart when he talked. We connected right away. For the first time ever, I felt like someone really understood me. Daniel was everything I thought I wanted. He was a successful lawyer, very polite, and my mom loved him. My friends always said how lucky I was. Even people at work said we looked perfect together. But as I looked at my wedding dress hanging by the window, something felt wrong in my stomach. I tried to tell myself it was just normal wedding nerves. Getting married is a big step, right? It's normal to feel scared. Then I heard a sound behind me. Knox, my German shepherd, was watching me from his favorite spot near my bed. His ears were up and his golden eyes were looking right at me. He had been acting strange for the past few weeks, ever since we started getting ready for the wedding. Knox wasn't just a pet, he was my best friend and protector. I got him 6 years ago when he was just a puppy. He was clumsy and full of energy, but he loved me completely. We had a special bond, and he had never shown any anger toward anyone I brought home. Until Daniel came along. First, it was small things. Knox would just stare at Daniel whenever he came over. He never relaxed when Daniel was around. Then Knox started making soft growling sounds. So quiet you could barely hear them, but I noticed. Daniel would laugh and say Knox was just being protective. But it got worse. Knox would sit between us whenever Daniel and I were close. If Daniel kissed me, Knox would stand up with his ears back and his tail stiff. Sometimes he would even show his teeth, not to attack, but as a warning. I tried to calm Knox down, but nothing worked. Daniel was getting tired of it. "He's jealous," Daniel said a few nights ago, shaking his head as Knox watched us from across the room. Maybe he should stay somewhere else for a while, just until after the wedding. I didn't like the idea of being without Knox, but Daniel seemed so reasonable about it. "I'm not saying forever," Daniel added with a smile. "Just so he doesn't ruin our special day." I agreed, even though it felt wrong. But that night, I woke up to find Knox standing at my bedroom door. His body was stiff and he looked like he was warning me about something. He wouldn't move even when I called him. Something was definitely not right. Now, as I turned back to look at myself in the mirror, I tried to push these thoughts away. I needed to focus on the wedding and the new life I was going to start with Daniel. But as I reached out to touch my wedding dress, I couldn't ignore the bad feeling in my stomach. Knox's eyes were still watching me, filled with something I couldn't understand. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my coffee. The smell was nice, mixing with the fresh morning air coming through the window. It should have been a peaceful moment before the busy wedding day started. But my mind was somewhere else, thinking about things that worried me. Knox was lying at my feet with his head on his paws. He wasn't sleeping, his ears moved at every little sound and his body was tense, like he was waiting for something bad to happen. He had been like this for days now. His usual playfulness was gone, replaced by this constant watching and waiting. I reached down and ran my fingers through his thick fur, hoping to make him feel better. He let out a slow breath but didn't relax. It wasn't just the growling anymore. Something about Knox had changed over the past week. Knox had started acting like Daniel was dangerous. He would put himself between us, standing stiff like a wall whenever Daniel came too close. The dog who had always been good and listened to me started ignoring commands when they meant moving away from Daniel. Twice, he had refused to leave the room when I told him to. Then there was last night. I was in bed, almost asleep, when a deep, scary growl woke me up completely. Knox was at my bedroom door, low to the ground with his ears back, staring at something in the dark hallway. The hall light was on, making a long shadow on the floor, but nothing looked wrong. Yet Knox didn't move. He stayed there, his muscles tight with worry. I whispered his name, but he barely looked at me. The next morning, I found him curled up in front of the closet where Daniel kept some of his clothes. When I tried to call him away, he hesitated, looking back and forth between me and Daniel's things inside. I laughed it off, thinking it was just some strange instinct or the unfamiliar smell of a man who didn't live in my apartment all the time. But now, sitting at the table and watching Knox's constant worry, I wasn't so sure. Daniel's reaction didn't help either. "He's being silly," Daniel had said, shaking his head with a smile that didn't look real. "You need to set rules, Amalia. He can't control who gets to be around you." I agreed, at least I said I did. But something about the way Daniel said it bothered me. It wasn't just that he was annoyed. It was something deeper, like he thought he owned me. A knock at the door made me jump, and Knox lifted his head right away, his ears straight up. I sighed and tried to shake off my nerves as I went to open it. Lauren stood outside with sunglasses on her head, a coffee cup in her hand, and a look on her face like she didn't believe something. "Morning, bride-to-be," she said, stepping inside before I could even say hello. Lauren had been my best friend since college. She was the one person who could always tell what I was really thinking. Sometimes this was good, and sometimes it wasn't. Today it felt more like the bad kind. "You look like you haven't slept," Lauren said, setting down her coffee and taking off her jacket. "Wedding stress," I replied, hoping that would be enough explanation. Lauren wasn't buying it. She looked down at Knox, who was now sitting up and watching her with serious eyes. "It's the dog, isn't it?" I hesitated before nodding. "He's been acting weird lately, growling at Daniel, following him with his eyes like he's waiting for something bad to happen." Lauren's eyebrows went up. "Maybe he senses something." I let out a small laugh. "Like what?" "That I'm about to marry a man he doesn't like." Lauren didn't laugh. Instead, she leaned against the counter with a thoughtful look. "Dogs notice things we don't. I read a story once about a woman whose dog wouldn't stop growling at her boyfriend. Turns out the guy was cheating on her. Animals just know." I rolled my eyes. "Knox isn't psychic." "No, but he's protective," Lauren said back. "And if he thinks something's wrong with Daniel, maybe you should listen." The words felt heavy, like a weight I hadn't been expecting, because deep down I had already been thinking the same thing, and I didn't want to admit it. Later that evening, after Lauren left, I found myself sitting on the couch, absently petting Knox's fur while Daniel sat across from me, looking at his phone. He looked perfect as always. His dark blue shirt was neat. His hair was styled just right. He was everything I thought I wanted. So why did I feel like something was wrong? I had spent the past 3 years convincing myself that Daniel was perfect for me. He was charming, smart, and responsible. But looking at him now, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I had been too eager to believe in his perfection. Knox suddenly lifted his head, his ears moving. Then he stood up and walked toward Daniel slowly and carefully. Daniel looked up. Knox stopped right in front of him. He didn't growl or show his teeth. He just stared. Daniel stared back. It was the first time I saw something unfamiliar in Daniel's face. A flash of something that didn't match the polished, calm image he always showed. It was irritation, but something darker than that. It was gone in a second, replaced by a chuckle as he reached down to scratch behind Knox's ears. "Still don't like me, huh?" Daniel said. Knox didn't move. Daniel sighed and stood up, stretching. "I should go. Big day coming up, right?" He leaned down and kissed my forehead before I could react. "Try to get some sleep." I nodded automatically, still watching Knox, who had turned his head slightly to follow Daniel as he walked to the door. The moment it clicked shut behind him, Knox let out a slow, low growl, a warning. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could ignore it. The morning of the wedding came with a strange quietness. The sun had barely come up, making everything look pale and golden. The house was quiet except for the occasional rustle of fabric or soft voices from another room. I sat in front of a big mirror while the makeup artist carefully put makeup on my face. She was talking about how beautiful brides always have a special glow. But I wasn't listening. My mind was somewhere else, tangled up in the worry that had been growing in my stomach for weeks. Knox was lying at the bottom of my chair, his golden eyes looking at my reflection in the mirror. He hadn't left my side all morning, moving only when I did. His presence usually made me feel better, but now it felt like a reminder. a silent warning that I was trying to ignore. My wedding dress was hanging across the room. It was beautiful, made of ivory lace with delicate decorations. It was perfect. Every detail, from the tiny beads on the top to the way the fabric flowed in soft waves, was exactly how I had imagined it. I had spent months planning this day, making sure every little thing was perfect. But as I sat there looking at myself in the mirror, I felt nothing but doubt. Lauren had been right. Knox had been right. But what was I supposed to do now? The guests were already at the wedding place. My mother was so excited. The person doing the ceremony was probably getting ready. The wedding was supposed to start in less than an hour. I couldn't just walk away. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. A moment later, my mother peeked inside, her eyes lighting up when she saw me in my silk robe. "Oh, sweetheart, you look beautiful," she said, stepping inside with a happy sigh. "I can't believe this day is finally here." I forced a smile, hoping it would hide the storm of feelings inside me. My mother walked over and smoothed her hand over my shoulder. "I know you're nervous, but that's normal. Every bride gets scared," she said with a small laugh. "I remember feeling the same way when I married your father. But the moment I walked down that aisle, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that everything I was feeling was just normal nervousness before such a big commitment. But deep down, I knew it was more than that." The door opened again, and this time it was Lauren. She was wearing her bridesmaid dress, a deep red color that looked beautiful on her. But even though she looked stunning, her face was serious. She had been watching me all morning, quietly waiting for me to say something. "We need to start getting you into your dress," Lauren said, looking at the clock. "The car will be here in 20 minutes. I nodded automatically. I stood up and smoothed my hands down my robe. But as I did, Knox suddenly let out a low, sharp growl. Both my mother and Lauren turned to look at the dog. "What's wrong with him?" my mother asked, frowning. I hesitated, looking down at Knox. He was staring at the door, his ears up and his body tense. The growl was still coming from deep in his chest, and the hair on his back was standing up. Then, before I could react, there was another knock on the door. This one was harder, more impatient. "Amalia? It's me." Daniel's voice came from the other side. "Can I come in?" Knox's growl turned into a sharp bark. His whole body changed, like he was getting ready for a fight. My heart jumped. "Not before the ceremony," my mother said quickly, moving toward the door. "It's bad luck. You know that." "I just need to talk to her for a second," Daniel said, sounding insistent. "It won't take long." I swallowed hard, looking at Lauren. My friend's face was unreadable, but her eyes moved from Knox to me and back again. It wasn't a good idea, but I nodded anyway. "Just a second," I said. My mother hesitated before sighing and stepping aside. Lauren didn't move, standing firm as I walked across the room and opened the door just a little. Daniel stood there looking perfect in his suit. His face was warm, his smile easy, but there was something behind his eyes that made my stomach feel tight. "I just wanted to see you," he said softly. "I know it's bad luck, but I needed to look at you before everything starts." Knox was still growling, standing right between us and refusing to back down. Daniel's eyes flicked to the dog, and his jaw tightened just a little. "Are we still dealing with this?" he murmured. I stiffened. "What do you mean?" Daniel let out a small sigh, shaking his head. "He's been acting crazy for weeks, Amalia. Maybe it's time we accept that this isn't normal." Something about the way he said it, so dismissive, so impatient, made my chest feel tight. "Or maybe he sees something I don't," I said before I could stop myself. Daniel's eyes snapped to mine. For just a moment, something flashed there, something sharp and cold. It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual easy smile. "You're nervous," he said, reaching up to touch my cheek. "That's all. It's just wedding nerves." My skin burned where his fingers touched me. For the first time, I realized I didn't want him touching me. A soft but firm hand landed on my shoulder, grounding me. I turned slightly and found Lauren standing behind me. The message in her eyes was clear. I took a step back. "I'll see you at the altar," I said, my voice steady. Daniel hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Then he nodded. "Of course," he said, stepping away. I closed the door before he could say anything else. I turned to Lauren, my heart pounding in my chest. "You don't have to do this," Lauren said quietly. I swallowed hard, looking down at Knox. He was still staring at the door, his ears back and his muscles tense. Something was about to happen. I just didn't know what yet. The ceremony had begun. The guests were sitting under a beautiful canopy of white roses and golden lights. Their quiet conversations mixed with the soft music playing in the background. The smell of flowers and fresh grass filled the evening air. For everyone there, it was the perfect setting for a wedding. The groom stood at the altar with his hands folded in front of him, showing the usual confidence that people expected from him. My heart was pounding as I stood at the entrance of the garden, hidden behind the tall hedges that separated me from the long aisle leading to the altar. The voices of the wedding coordinator and my mother blended into background noise as they moved around me, adjusting the lace of my dress and making sure everything was perfect. Lauren stood to my left, silent but present. Her eyes were on me with a look I couldn't read. Knox sat beside me, still as stone. His eyes were locked on the scene ahead. Unlike the rest of the wedding party, he wasn't thinking about the beauty of the evening, the elegance of the decorations, or the perfection of the moment. His body was stiff, ears up, and every breath was measured. The music changed. This was my cue. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The fabric of my dress trailed behind me as I moved through the opening and onto the aisle. The guests stood up from their seats, their faces turning toward me with admiration and awe. I saw smiles, camera flashes, and people whispering to each other about how beautiful I looked. Then my eyes met Daniel's. He was watching me with that same easy confidence. His face was warm, his smile perfect. Everything about him seemed right, but something in my gut told me otherwise. I felt Knox tense at my side. I barely had time to notice it before everything fell apart. Knox lunged forward with a snarl so violent that the guests pulled back in shock. The music stopped as instruments faltered and people gasped. The wedding coordinator screamed, stumbling backward. Knox darted ahead, breaking free from my grip. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. Daniel's face changed. His eyes got wide not with fear, but with something else. Surprise. Anger. He barely had time to react before the massive German shepherd crashed into him with the full weight of his body. Chaos broke out. Guests screamed. Chairs fell over as people scrambled away from the fight. My mother grabbed her chest in horror while Lauren moved quickly, stepping closer to me as if getting ready for what would come next. Daniel hit the ground hard. Knox's snarls were wild, his teeth showing as he pinned the groom beneath him. His nose was inches from Daniel's face, and deep growls came from his chest. "Get that dog off him!" someone shouted. The person doing the ceremony took a step back, trembling and clutching his book. Daniel struggled beneath Knox, but the dog wouldn't let up. His posture was aggressive but controlled. He hadn't bitten, not yet, but his body was positioned in a way that told everyone he would if he had to. My breath caught in my throat. I knew Knox. This wasn't just an attack. This was something else entirely. For weeks, he had been warning me. For weeks, he had tried to tell me something I refused to see. Daniel cursed, pressing his hands against Knox's fur to try to push him off. The moment he did, Knox's snarl got deeper. His teeth glistened under the soft glow of the wedding lights. His muscles were coiled like a spring waiting to be released. Then, as Daniel struggled, I saw it. The flash of something dark in his face. The anger. The frustration. The brief moment when his mask slipped. It was just a second, just long enough for me to catch it. But it was enough. Enough to make me realize. Enough to make me finally see. Lauren moved before I could react, her voice cutting through the noise. "Amalia!" I turned. Lauren wasn't looking at me. She was staring at someone in the crowd. A woman had pushed her way to the front, holding a phone in her hands. Her face was pale, her expression tense. Her eyes were locked on Daniel with unmistakable recognition. "I need to speak to you," the woman said, her voice shaking. I barely had time to process what was happening before security rushed in. Two men grabbed Knox, pulling him away despite his resistance. The moment he was forced back, Daniel scrambled to his feet, brushing himself off with quick, jerky movements. His whole attitude had changed. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. The easygoing charm he had always shown was suddenly gone. Jesus Christ, he hissed, his voice sharp. You need to put that dog down. The words hit me like a slap. I turned toward him, barely hearing the guests still whispering, barely noticing the way security held Knox back. All I could focus on was Daniel, on the way he looked at me, on the way his mask had cracked just enough for me to finally see through it. The woman with the phone stepped forward, her hands shaking as she unlocked the screen. You don't know who he really is, she said, looking at me. You need to see this. A silence fell over the crowd. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears as I reached for the phone. Then, as I looked at the messages, the images, the undeniable proof, I felt my stomach drop. Daniel had lied. Not just small lies. Not just harmless things he didn't tell me. It was worse. So much worse. The messages showed fraud, manipulation, a pattern of behavior that went back years. And I wasn't the first. I wasn't even close. A sickening realization settled in my chest as I lifted my eyes back to Daniel. His face had hardened now. His hands were clenched at his sides. He saw the truth in my eyes the moment I knew. And for the first time since I had met him, he looked afraid. Knox struggled against the security guards, his growls rising again. He knew. He had always known. The perfect man I had planned to marry wasn't perfect at all. He was a monster in disguise. And I had almost given him everything. The air was thick with tension. The once beautiful wedding venue, decorated with golden fabric and perfect white roses, had become a battlefield of silence broken only by murmurs rippling through the stunned crowd. The guests who had once been sitting in neat rows now stood scattered. Their faces showed curiosity, shock, and unease. The aisle that I was supposed to walk down felt like a dividing line, before and after. Before the truth, after the truth. Daniel stood near the altar. His suit was wrinkled from being forced to the ground. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. His jaw was tight, and his eyes scanned the crowd as if he was planning his next move. Gone was the calm, easygoing man she had believed him to be. His mask had cracked, and for the first time I saw him as he truly was. Not the charming, successful lawyer who had swept me off my feet, but someone who had built his life on careful lies. Knox was still held back by two security guards, his body strained against their grip. His deep growls continued as if he was the only one still acting on instinct. He had known long before I had. My fingers were ice cold as I held the phone the woman had given me. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, waiting, expecting me to react. The images on the screen were undeniable text messages, emails, legal documents, evidence of fraud, manipulation, and even previous engagements that had all ended under suspicious circumstances. Women who had once stood where I stood now, believing in the same carefully crafted lie, only to have it crumble beneath them. You don't understand. Daniel's voice finally cut through the noise. His tone was forcibly calm. This is a mistake. His words barely registered. My mind was racing, flashing back to the past 3 years, replaying them with alarming clarity. The small things that didn't add up. The way he had always avoided questions about his past. The vague explanations. The expertly placed charm that had distracted me from the gaps in his story. I had convinced myself that none of it mattered. That every relationship had missing pieces. I had wanted to believe in the dream so badly that I had ignored the warnings, both from my own instincts and from Knox. My heart pounded in my chest. I don't think it is, I finally said, my voice quiet but firm. Daniel's jaw tightened. I turned to the woman who had given me the phone. She looked terrified. Her hands were still shaking. Her eyes darted between me and Daniel as if she feared what would happen next. You knew him? I asked. The woman hesitated before nodding. I was supposed to marry him. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. My stomach twisted. I already knew what the woman was going to say before she even said it. I found out too late, the woman continued, her voice barely above a whisper. By the time I realized who he really was, I had already lost everything. She swallowed hard. He's not who you think he is. Silence. The weight of her words settled over the gathering like a suffocating fog. I turned back to Daniel. Is this true? He scoffed, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. His voice had lost its warmth. His patience was thinning. You're really going to believe the word of some woman you've never met over me? The way he said it, some woman, sent a shiver down my spine. There was a sharpness in his voice, an edge that had never been directed at me before. Or maybe it had been and I had just ignored it. I held up the phone. You have an explanation for this? Daniel took a step forward, and instantly Knox snarled. His entire body went rigid. The security guards struggled to hold him back, their grips tightening on his collar. But his growls only grew deeper, his hair standing up like a wolf ready to defend its pack. Daniel stopped. His eyes flickered, calculating. For the first time, I saw hesitation. Not guilt, not remorse. Hesitation. It was a confirmation. I think we're done here, I said. The words slipped out before I could even process them. A murmur rippled through the crowd again, louder this time. Some guests exchanged wide-eyed glances. Others whispered among themselves. Daniel's face darkened. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice dropping lower. I lifted my chin. No, I almost made a mistake. The words felt strange, foreign in my mouth. I had spent the past 3 years convincing myself that Daniel was everything I wanted, everything I had been waiting for. I had let myself fall into the illusion, into the carefully created version of him that he had presented to the world. But I wasn't the first. I had nearly become just another name on a list of women he had deceived. But I wasn't. Not today. I turned to Lauren, who had been standing silent beside me the entire time. My friend met my gaze with quiet understanding, waiting for me to say the words that would end this once and for all. Lauren gave the smallest nod. I exhaled. Then I turned back to Daniel. I'm not marrying you. The words felt like an avalanche, final, unstoppable. Daniel's face hardened, but he didn't speak. His silence was deafening. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and walked away. A few guests gasped as he strode past them. His movement was sharp, his back rigid with barely contained anger. He didn't look back. He walked out of the garden, out of the wedding, out of my life. The moment he disappeared from sight, Knox let out a low, steady huff. The tension in his body eased. For the first time in weeks, his ears perked forward and his posture relaxed. I let out a shaky breath. It was over. The guests stood in stunned silence, waiting for something, anything, to signal what came next. My mother looked devastated but not surprised. The person doing the ceremony stood awkwardly at the altar, glancing between the abandoned aisle and the whispers among the attendees. Lauren finally broke the silence. Well, she said, clapping her hands together, that was quite a show. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Then the tension broke. Guests began murmuring. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others nodded as though they had suspected something all along. Some approached me cautiously, offering quiet words of support. Others simply left, unsure of what to say after the collapsed wedding. I didn't move. I felt frozen. My mind was still reeling from everything that had just happened. The adrenaline, the shock, the realization of how close I had come to making the worst mistake of my life. Knox leaned against my leg, pressing his weight into me, grounding me. I ran a hand through his fur, exhaling shakily. Lauren touched my arm. Are you okay? I nodded slowly, even though I wasn't sure if it was true. But I would be. I had made the right choice. And for the first time in a long time, I had listened not to the noise, not to the expectations, but to the one voice that had been trying to protect me all along. Knox had known. I should have listened sooner. But I had listened now. And that was what mattered. The garden was quieter now. though the remnants of chaos still lingered in the air like a thick fog. Guests had begun to leave in hushed groups. Their conversations were tense and full of speculation. Some left quickly, desperate to escape the weight of what had just happened. Others lingered, reluctant to leave, as if expecting another twist in the spectacle they had just witnessed. I stood frozen in place, my hands gripping the delicate lace of my dress. The train pooled around my feet like spilled silk. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times before, the end of the ceremony, the walk down the aisle hand in hand with my husband, the applause, the celebration. But instead of joy, I felt only exhaustion. My body felt heavy, as if it had carried the weight of an entire lifetime in the past few hours. Knox was still pressed against my side. His body was warm and solid, grounding me. He had stopped growling. His stance was no longer rigid with aggression, but he remained watchful. His golden eyes swept across the remaining guests every few seconds. His gaze flickered toward the path Daniel had disappeared down, as if making sure he wouldn't return. I barely noticed when my mother appeared beside me. Her face was lined with disappointment and something else, relief. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her lips were pressed into a thin line as she watched her daughter, as if assessing whether I was strong enough to handle what had just happened. "You did the right thing," she finally said. I exhaled, my chest tight. "Then why do I feel like I just destroyed everything?" My mother's expression softened. "Because you almost did. But you didn't." She glanced toward where the guests were still murmuring among themselves. "It's a shock, but a temporary one. People will forget. They'll move on. And so will you." I wanted to believe that, but the truth was I wasn't sure what moving on even looked like right now. Lauren appeared on my other side, holding 2 glasses of champagne. She shoved one into my hand without a word. "Well," she said, taking a sip from her own glass, "that was the most dramatic wedding I've ever attended, and I once went to a ceremony where the groom's ex showed up pregnant." I let out a dry laugh, even though I didn't feel like laughing at all. Lauren nudged me. "Listen, I know this feels like the worst thing in the world right now, but let's be real, you dodged a huge bullet. Not even a bullet, a full-on exploding, life-ruining missile." I glanced at her, pressing my lips into a thin line. "Then why does it still feel like I lost?" Lauren's expression softened. "Because you invested in something that wasn't real. And that hurts. It's supposed to. That was the worst part of it. I had spent 3 years building a future with Daniel, believing in the version of him that he had carefully created for me. I had imagined our life together, had made plans, had trusted him with the parts of myself that I didn't give to just anyone. And now all of it was gone, shattered in a single night. I looked down at Knox, who was now sitting at my feet. His ears twitched as he watched me. He had never trusted Daniel. Not once. He had tried to warn me from the beginning, and I had ignored him. A lump formed in my throat. I knelt down, wrapping my arms around Knox's broad neck, burying my face in his thick fur. "I should have listened to you," I murmured. He let out a soft huff, pressing his nose into my shoulder. Lauren crouched beside me, scratching behind Knox's ears. "I hate to say I told you so," she said. I scoffed. "No, you don't." Lauren grinned. "Fine, I love to say it, but I'm saying it with love." I let out a shaky laugh, even as my eyes stung with tears I hadn't shed yet. The guests were leaving now. The murmur of their voices faded into the night. Some gave me sympathetic looks. Others avoided eye contact entirely, as if pretending they hadn't just witnessed the most humiliating moment of my life. The person doing the ceremony gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder before disappearing. My mother sighed and muttered something about making calls to handle the inevitable fallout. Lauren stood, stretching her arms above her head. "So what now?" I stared at the remnants of my ruined wedding, the flowers, the decorations, the chairs that had been knocked over in the chaos, the half-empty champagne glasses abandoned on tables. I took a deep breath. "I think I need to get out of here." Lauren nodded. "Good, because I already told the caterers to pack up some of the food, and I stole a bottle of the good champagne." I blinked at her. "You did what?" Lauren shrugged. I figured if we're going to sit around and process this mess, we might as well do it with decent food and alcohol. Despite everything, I felt the smallest, faintest hint of a smile tug at the corner of my lips. I turned to Knox. "You up for some takeout and bad decisions?" His ears perked up, and I could have sworn he understood exactly what I was saying. That was all the answer I needed. Hours later, I found myself sitting on the floor of my apartment, still in my wedding dress but now barefoot. My hair was undone, my makeup smudged from rubbing my eyes too many times. Lauren sat beside me, legs stretched out in front of her, chopsticks in one hand and a champagne glass in the other. Knox was curled up between us, occasionally nudging my knee with his nose. "So," Lauren said, taking a bite of noodles, "on a scale of 1 to 10, how tempted are you to fake your own death and move to another country?" I exhaled. "About a 12. Lauren raised her glass. "Understandable." I stared at the television, which was playing some reality show neither of us were paying attention to. My body ached from exhaustion, but my mind was still racing, replaying everything that had happened, every choice I had made. I had been so sure about Daniel, so convinced that I had finally found the right person. But Knox had known better. Lauren nudged my shoulder. "Hey!" I turned my head. "You're going to be okay," Lauren said, her voice softer now. "Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but you will be." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wanted to believe that, and maybe, just maybe, I did. The morning light came through the half-open blinds, making soft golden streaks across the wooden floor. The remains of last night's feast were scattered around empty takeout boxes, an empty champagne bottle, and a few crumpled napkins on the coffee table. The television still played quietly in the background, forgotten at some point in the night when exhaustion had finally won. I shifted, feeling the weight of something warm pressed against my side. Knox was curled up next to me, his large head resting on my lap. His steady breathing was the only constant sound in the quiet room. Lauren was sprawled out on the couch, one leg hanging off the side, an empty glass still balanced carefully in her hand. For the first time since yesterday, I allowed myself to breathe. Everything was different now. The future I had planned had been erased in a single evening. The illusion of security was shattered. I had spent so long believing in something that was never real, and now I was left with nothing but uncertainty. Yet as I ran my fingers absently through Knox's thick fur, I didn't feel the crushing grief I had expected. I felt relief. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't overwhelming, but it was there, small and quiet beneath the exhaustion. Daniel was gone. The life I had thought I wanted was gone, and somehow that was okay. I shifted slightly, careful not to disturb Knox, and reached for my phone. Messages flooded my screen, missed calls from my mother, texts from concerned friends, even a few reporters who had somehow caught wind of the spectacle that had been my wedding day. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my photo gallery, scrolling back through the pictures I had taken over the past few years. There they were, smiling, posed, perfect pictures of me and Daniel at dinners, on vacations, at family gatherings. To anyone else, they looked like the perfect couple. But now, as I studied them, I saw what I had never allowed myself to see before. The distance in his eyes, the careful positioning of his hands, the way he had always controlled the story, making sure everything appeared perfect. I had been so blinded by the idea of what our life could be that I had ignored the signs. A deep sigh left my lips, and I tilted my head back, staring at the ceiling. It was strange how grief worked. I had expected heartbreak, expected tears and an unbearable sense of loss. But there was only emptiness, and maybe that was what hurt the most. Lauren groaned from the couch, shifting as she stretched one arm over her face. "Tell me we're not awake right now." I let out a small, tired laugh. "We're awake." "Unacceptable," Lauren mumbled, rubbing her eyes before sitting up with a groggy sigh. She blinked at the mess around them. "God, it looks like we threw a party." "In a way, we did," I said. Lauren smirked. "A party for surviving the worst wedding in history. Something like that." Lauren studied me for a moment, her usual sharp humor softening. "How are you feeling?" I thought about that for a second. "Better than I should." Lauren nodded approvingly. Good. That means your brain is finally catching up with reality. Daniel was a walking red flag. Honestly, I should have worn sunglasses every time I saw you two together. I exhaled through my nose. I knew she was right. You're allowed to be mad at yourself, you know, she said. I was, but right now I was too tired to dwell on it. Knox let out a contented sigh in his sleep, shifting slightly against my lap. Lauren nudged my foot with her own. So what's the plan? I frowned. Plan? Yeah, you know, the thing you do when you decide you're not going to marry a con artist and have to figure out what the hell comes next. That was the question, wasn't it? What came next? For so long, I had imagined a life with Daniel, our home, our future, children, our carefully planned existence. Now all of that was gone. And for the first time in years, I had no idea what to do. I don't know, I admitted. I haven't really thought about it. Lauren rolled her eyes. You never think about yourself first. Maybe it's time you do. That struck something deep in my chest. I had always been the planner, the responsible one, the one who put everything into making sure things worked. But I had never stopped to ask myself what I actually wanted. Maybe it was time to change that. The thought was terrifying and exciting at the same time. I glanced down at Knox, who had been my anchor through all of this. Something inside me settled. I think I just need time, I said. Lauren raised her champagne glass from last night in an exaggerated toast. To taking time. I clinked my glass against Lauren's. To not making terrible life choices. Lauren smirked. We'll work on that one. They sat there in silence for a while. The weight of everything still pressed down on them, but somehow it didn't feel as suffocating anymore. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time I was okay with that. The days stretched into weeks, and the chaos of the failed wedding began to settle into something softer, something quieter. The headlines faded. The whispers dulled. Life, as it always did, moved on. I spent the first few days in a haze of exhaustion, avoiding phone calls, ignoring messages, and refusing to engage in any conversation about Daniel. My mother tried to check in, carefully tiptoeing around the topic, but I wasn't ready. Lauren had been my buffer, handling calls and running interference. But even she knew that I couldn't stay in limbo forever. Knox, ever my shadow, never left my side. He seemed lighter now, less on edge, as if his mission had been completed. As if he had done what he had always set out to do, protect me. I let myself move through the motions, taking long walks with Knox through the city, wandering through bookstores without any real intention of buying anything, sitting in coffee shops and watching the world move around me. For the first time in a long time, there was no pressure, no expectation, no plan. And that, more than anything, terrified me. I had spent years carefully crafting the life I thought I wanted. I had worked hard, made careful choices, followed the path that had always been laid out before me. But now, standing on the other side of something I had once believed was my future, I realized I had no idea who I was outside of it. One afternoon, while scrolling aimlessly on my phone, I found myself looking at an old photo of me and Knox. It had been taken years ago, before Daniel, before all of this. We were at an animal shelter, surrounded by dogs of all shapes and sizes. I had volunteered there for a time, before life had gotten too busy, before I had convinced myself that I didn't have the time. I stared at the photo for a long time, feeling something stir inside me. The next morning, I found myself standing outside that same shelter. It hadn't changed much. The brick building still had the same slightly faded sign hanging above the door. Inside, the scent of clean straw and disinfectant filled the air, mixed with the familiar sound of dogs barking. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Hi there. Can I help you?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish for showing up without a plan. But before I could second-guess myself, I found myself saying, "I was wondering if you needed volunteers." The woman's smile widened. "We always need volunteers." And just like that, I started spending my days at the shelter. At first, it was just a few hours here and there, helping with feedings, walking the dogs, cleaning up. But as the days passed, I found myself staying longer, losing track of time, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't realized I had been missing. Knox was a fixture there too. The staff adored him, and the other dogs seemed to look to him for some kind of silent guidance. He was patient with the anxious ones, gentle with the younger ones, always watching, always aware. One afternoon, as I was finishing up for the day, I walked past a row of kennels and stopped. There, curled up in the corner of his enclosure, was an older golden retriever. His fur was peppered with silver, his eyes warm but tired. Unlike the other dogs, who eagerly jumped at the sight of a visitor, he simply watched me. His tail gave the smallest, slowest wag. My heart clenched. I knelt down, pressing my fingers against the metal bars. "Who's this?" I asked. One of the staff members walked over. "That's Lucky. He's been here a while. Older dogs are harder to place." Lucky lifted his head slightly, his deep brown eyes meeting mine. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I knew that feeling, being overlooked, being left behind. I exhaled. "I'll take him." The words surprised even me, but as soon as I said them, I knew they were right. The staff member blinked. "You want to adopt him?" I nodded. "Yeah, I do." Lucky was hesitant at first, unsure of me, unsure of Knox. But within hours of being home, he had settled into the space as if he had always belonged. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment. Knox was curled up beside me, Lucky on my other side. I ran my fingers through Lucky's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I had spent so much time grieving a future that had never been real, mourning a life that had never truly been mine. But sitting here now, surrounded by the quiet comfort of these two dogs who had come into my life at different times but for the same reason, I realized that I had gained something far more valuable. I had found myself again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best thing that had ever happened to me. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Check out more stories like this by watching the next video or exploring our other content. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who would love it too. Thanks for watching.